Hello, welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host, and today we have with us a fascinating, wonderful woman, New York State Assemblywoman Rebecca Seawright. Rebecca not only works in government, but she's been a tremendous supporter of philanthropic causes here on the eastern end of Long Island and then beyond. And Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. And Rebecca, what exactly does a state assembly person do?
Well, thank you, Jean, for having me on your show. A state assemblywoman, I'm honored to serve representing parts of the Upper East Side of Manhattan and all of Roosevelt Island. And primarily, we're charged with balancing the state budget for the state of New York, as well as sponsoring legislation. And in our community office, our storefront office on York Avenue and 79th, we have numerous constituent services. We respond basically to our neighbors and constituents and what they need assistance with. If they're having trouble with a landlord, we sponsor a free housing clinic. Or if they have unemployment issues, we run interference with the state on a number of issues.
And we have a lot of issues right now that we're dealing with, a lot of problems because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then also because of, the racial injustices. And so, Rebecca, but before we get to those issues, would you tell me a little bit about what you did before you became a state assemblywoman?
So before I was elected in 2014 as the first woman to represent the 76th Assembly District, I was an assistant district attorney and an administrative law judge.
Nice. And so you're now going up for your fourth term. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was elected in 2014, and every 2 years we run for re-election, and just so honored and pleased to have a number of endorsements from labor unions and organizations as well as other elected officials.
Yes, and you're considered pretty much a moderate. Is that correct?
I have sponsored a lot of progressive legislation in the state assembly and have been so pleased to pass the 3D mammography bill that provides 3D mammograms for men, women, and families without any deductible or co-charge from the insurance company, as well as being
Wonderful.
The lead sponsor of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Tell me more about that, the Equal Rights Amendment in our state, and what does that exactly mean to women?
So currently, we do not have the Equal Rights Amendment in the New York State Constitution or the federal Constitution. And so I have passed on the Assembly side of the legislature an Equal Rights Amendment to be added to our New York State Constitution. It has to be passed in 2 consecutive sessions and then put before the voters as a referendum. And, you know, United States Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, women will never have complete equality until they're recognized in the Constitution. And so it's something that you think of New York as a progressive state. We've passed
Absolutely.
Marriage equality and so many other things. It's time to pass the Equal Rights Amendment and add it to not only the New York State Constitution, but the federal Constitution as well.
And I'm guessing that a lot of people aren't even aware of this. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. In the New York, a lot of people just assume that we have it in our New York State Constitution.
And we don't.
Right. And it
Terrible.
passed unanimously in the State Assembly, and I passed a resolution calling on Congress to pass it at the federal level as well.
And do you think it's going to happen?
I definitely think it's going to happen.
Soon, or are we going to have to wait many years?
Well, you know, this is the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote, so I think the time is right to do it in memory of our suffragette sisters and honoring that right that women now have had for 100 years, that right to vote. So we need to pass the Equal Rights Amendment and pay women equally, work for pay equity, and so I think getting the ERA in the Constitution will go a long way in helping to promote women's rights and women's equal treatment.
Well, I think we really need that and want that as a woman. I certainly do, and many of us will remember in late August, I think the date was August 26th, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote in the United States. And this is a very important milestone, 100 years, but something else I wanted to speak to you about, and that is racial justice, which is so important. And I understand when that right to vote happened in 1920, it was only for, was it white women?
And you know, just recently, Hillary Clinton attended a big unveiling on the 100th anniversary in Central Park of Sojourner Truth and other icons, and we don't have enough recognition of women, and that's something that I want to see more of. And so there was, on the 100th anniversary, this big, beautiful unveiling of the women in Central Park. And so I think that we just need to do more to recognize women. And Jean, I was so honored to honor you during Women's History Month as a woman of achievement that's been such a role model in the philanthropy field, and all that you do.
Thank you, and I remember that. And just going back to racial justice for a minute, and then we can talk about philanthropy. Racial justice is just such an important issue, and we have to have it. And so when we look back on the history of our country, we've seen and we've all known that a lot of things that should have never happened, happened. But thank goodness, everything is changing now, and I'm very, very happy about this. And how are you involved in racial justice, and what are you doing to promote racial justice?
So I participated in a vigil in Carl Schurz Park on the Upper East Side and marched up York Avenue right in front of my community office with signs and demonstrated, and was a co-sponsor of numerous pieces of legislation, including the repeal of Article 50A in the state legislature, that I think is going to go a long way. But there's still so much more that we have to do, and
I agree.
I'm working with some of my constituents on legislation that would support the mandatory teaching of African studies, and I also have an LGBT curriculum bill which New Jersey passed, so we must do more. And so I see myself as a progressive that's sponsoring legislation in response to the times that we're in. So we all have to do more, especially hard during this national pandemic, but
yes,
it's so important.
For sure. And one of the issues that I wanted to speak to Rebecca about today was the COVID-19 pandemic and where we're going in New York State. Today I read that 13 million people remain out of work in the United States, and with that comes a lot of hardship and a lot of problems for many, many, many people. And Rebecca, so what is the state looking to do to rectify some of the terrible problems caused by this disastrous COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, the state is certainly pushing and supporting for a vaccination to come out, but the key is testing. And so we need to provide more tests in all communities all over the state, on college campuses, and in our communities. We need to encourage people and demonstrate and show people that it's very easy to get tested. And that's how we're going to control the surge. And then long term, we need a vaccination, and we need to be investing dollars in that. I've passed thousands and thousands of masks out in the neighborhood to the community and to our hospitals. I held a press conference at Kohler Hospital on Roosevelt Island to really bring attention to what is needed.
And what about programs for the people that are so affected by this pandemic? Can you talk a little bit about some of the programs that you support?
Absolutely. So the Small Business Development Center provides free business advice. We've been passing out hand sanitizer, big gallon jugs, and masks to our local businesses, offering them some grant and writing instruction on how to apply for aid. And so I just think it's so important to help our small businesses that are the backbone. And we've helped thousands of people in the district with their unemployment cases. And I've been personally calling through that list and talking to people, making sure that they're getting their unemployment check, and do they need assistance with resume writing, or trying to steer them into thinking how they can get back to work, because that's really what people want to do.
I think so. And when people are out of work and unemployed, it's very difficult, because even though someone might be getting unemployment, it's usually never what they were earning, and a sense of self-esteem is also diminished. So hopefully, with people like Rebecca and other important people in government, we will have more and more programs to prepare people to get back into the workforce. And if they need training in new careers, that will happen as well. Rebecca, your office was recently the subject of a hate crime. And I remember reading about this, and I just couldn't believe it. And that was, I think, in August 2020, correct?
That is correct, and we have seen a rise in hate crimes lately.
And what do you think that's the cause of?
My government office has held 23 consecutive town halls on Tuesday evening on Zoom since the pandemic started in March. And one of the town halls that I hosted featured national Jewish leaders and rabbis. And right after that town hall, we were targeted, and white paint was thrown on our front door.
That's terrible.
A anti-Semitic and sexually explicit, inappropriate note was slidden under our office door. They have caught the perpetrator, and I do want to thank the NYPD, the 19th Precinct, the Hate Crimes Task Force, and the state troopers for their...
And they did a good job.
Absolutely. They did a wonderful job in catching the perpetrator. But this week I am launching new hate crime legislation, working very closely with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to strengthen the penal code, and to not just make it optional, but to actually require the judge to make it mandatory to have anti-hate counseling and other forms of community service that are needed and very much warranted, so that we can strengthen the programs that exist and make it mandatory when someone is caught and prosecuted and charged with a hate crime.
And so what is happening to this individual right now who was caught? Where is he, and is he home, or is he in prison?
I have not been in touch, and it's
probably a good idea not to be in touch.
Right, part of the prosecution's case, so I can't go into detail, but I'm just so thankful that our law enforcement has worked so quickly and swiftly to arrest this person, and I'm very excited about this new legislation that will strengthen our hate crime law, and to have the endorsement of so many leaders and groups who support it, and I'm confident that it will pass the Assembly.
Yes, and well, now philanthropy is, to give the definition, it's the love of all mankind and all living beings. So when you hear about a hate crime, there's something very wrong there. This is not philanthropy. This is the opposite. And just to go back now to Rebecca, I want to ask Rebecca about your interest in philanthropy. Rebecca, why do you think philanthropy is so important, especially today, especially with all we're going through now, with the COVID pandemic, with the racial injustice? Where do you stand with philanthropy?
I just think it's so important, Jean, to give and to educate and raise awareness to philanthropy. Anybody can be a philanthropist. They can give money, they can give their volunteer time, and you're such a role model around the country, Jean, for what you do as a philanthropist.
Well, you're very kind, Rebecca, but I say I do try. But yes, so philanthropy, as Rebecca stated, it's about giving time, knowledge, and then for those that have resources, I believe those that have resources have a true obligation to give, because to be wealthy and not to give back, in my estimation, is the wrong thing. And so now you especially like to support women in philanthropy, I think. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I was so pleased and honored to be able to recognize your work as a philanthropist,
well, thank you.
As well as your daughter with
tell
Global
our
Strays.
audience a little about your awards in philanthropy for women that you feel have
Absolutely.
achieved.
So once a year during Women's History Month, we host a Women's Awards Gala recognizing women in philanthropy and in leadership positions. And it's a wonderful time to bring recognition and thanks to these women of achievement, and to really bring awareness and to show other women and men and families that what they can do is replicate giving. It makes you feel wonderful to be able to give either financially or your volunteer time, and especially in this national crisis of COVID. It's so important to volunteer to deliver meals to the shut-in. We have delivered thousands of meals on the Upper East Side to the senior population that's shut in, as well as PPE equipment, and just getting out there in the community. And really, if you can't afford to support it financially, then volunteer your time to those that are less fortunate, and pick your subject of interest that you would like to support, whether it's animal rights or women's rights or LGBT, human rights, the environment. And now that we're in this COVID pandemic, so many people are suffering, and it's so important more than ever to call yourself a philanthropist and donate your time and your money to support others.
Very important. And I think the fact that you have this award ceremony is very important, because you encourage these women to do more, and you empower them to feel good about what they're doing. And I know that anytime it's just human nature, if someone says something nice about what you're doing, well, you want to do it more, especially if you're doing something good and that's helping. And so thank you for doing that, Rebecca. That's so important. And then we never spoke about the LGBTQ community. What exactly are you doing to help our community?
So I am the lead sponsor in the Assembly on an LGBT curriculum bill. New Jersey passed it last year, and when you think of New York as a progressive state, we passed marriage equality and so many other important issues that during the 50th anniversary of Stonewall and the Stonewall riots, I introduced this LGBT curriculum bill. New Jersey, like I said, passed it, and I just feel the time is right to, do more sensitivity training and teach more in our schools about LGBT, and by putting in this curriculum like the great icon Edie Windsor and Harvey Milk and so many other, Martha P. Johnson, great LGBT leaders, so that we are educating our students in our schools.
Nice. And what advice would you give to a young person who wants to go into politics? What would you suggest? How should they start that journey?
Well, that is a wonderful question, and I would give the advice that they should definitely do it. They should pick the issues that are closest to their heart and that they're passionate about, and then study our national leaders like Eleanor Roosevelt, who've come before us, and look at the issues that our national leaders have focused on, and take inspiration from what they accomplished so that women could run for office, and to totally just get excited about running for office and planning and preparation.
Do we need more women in political offices?
I think Susan B. Anthony said, in order to create an equal playing field, women have to elect themselves as lawmakers for full equality. And so I think the time is right to elect more women. New York State
to balance things out more.
Absolutely. New York State is below the average. And so
why do you think that's the case?
I think women are seen as the caregivers of children and stay-at-home moms, and if women in the careers, it's very difficult to just give
everything.
up and juggle and balance and run for office, and it's harder for women to raise money than it is statistically, we have seen. And so there's wonderful organizations like the Eleanor's Legacy Foundation, as well as Emily's List, that help to train women to become candidates and on how to raise money. I got my start very early working for Governor Ann Richards of Texas, and I remember picking Ann up at 4 o'clock in the morning and all the lessons that she taught me about being a woman leader and a good public servant.
Finally, are you excited about this upcoming election?
I am very excited about the election, and I think we've done a number of reforms with our election law in New York State. The governor signed one of my election reform bills into law this June of this summer, and so we've made a lot of changes. It's easier now for people to vote. We have 10-day early voting that starts October 24th. Anyone can request their absentee ballot application now. And
how do you do that?
You can go on to the Board of Elections website.
And what is that? Do you know the website?
I believe it is nycboe.gov if you're in New York City, or you can stop by my office at 1485 York Avenue, and we have a stack of absentee ballot applications. And so it's very easy. You fill out the form and you mail it back in. On September 18th, they'll be mailing out the absentee ballots in New York City, I'm told. And people can, the day their ballot comes in the mail, they can mail it back instantly.
I think we're going to see a lot of absentee votes, and that's because many people have left New York right now. And before we go back to the whole voting process, how is this this enormous number of people leaving New York, how is that affecting New York City?
Well, I was talking...
And will New York City recover?
I think New York City is a strong, resourceful city, and we will recover. It will take time, but we will bounce back, and we will see our favorite restaurants and businesses succeeding. And we survived 9/11, and we will survive COVID-19.
I think so for sure, and I think New York always comes back. And for our viewers, you're watching Successful Philanthropy. I'm Jean Shafiroff. With me today is Rebecca Seawright, New York State Assemblywoman, and we are discussing all of the issues that affect most of us here in New York State and then everywhere in this country. And unfortunately, during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, most of us have been very much affected one way or another, and Rebecca has spoken a little bit about what she is involved in to help people with this terrible pandemic. She's also spoken about what she's doing in the way of helping women's rights progress, LGBTQ rights progress, and a host of many other subjects. Rebecca, so getting back to the voting process, we have 3 more minutes, and I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that because I think it's so important for people to go out and vote. And this year, with people scattered all over the place, it's a lot more difficult.
It certainly is, Jean, and we just have to be so mindful of the pandemic and staying safe and washing our hands, social distancing, wearing our mask, and using hand sanitizer. And so if people are uncomfortable going to vote during early voting, which starts for 10 days on October 24th, or actually voting at their polling place on November 3rd, they can request that absentee ballot. It's very easy to request and fill out. Once it arrives in the mail, fill out the application, send it back. When their ballot comes in the mail, if they don't trust the mail system, and I've heard a number of issues and concerns of people and of voters, they can actually take that ballot that came in the mail and drop it off during October 24th, during those 10 days at their polling site. They can deposit it right there, and it never has to go back in the mail. So the important thing is to have a large, robust turnout. And so to encourage as many people to vote absentee or vote early and take advantage of that 10-day early voting period that we now have. We didn't always have that in New York.
Oh, one other question. What about the concern of absentee ballot fraud. Are you worried about that?
I don't think so in New York. We've put into place new legislation and new laws that, if implemented correctly by the Board of Elections, I think in June, we had a good trial run with our primary, and now we're geared up and we're ready for this very important presidential year in November. And I think that we will avoid long lines that we saw 4 years ago during the presidential election. I remember in my district, there were lines all the way down the block wrapped around double people waiting to actually vote.
Well, and we don't want long lines this year with COVID-19. We certainly don't. It's not what we should be doing. We shouldn't be, none of us should be in large crowds, and none of us should be in a situation where we're around people who aren't social distancing and not wearing masks and not keeping themselves clean, because this is a very important year. And finally, I want to thank you, Rebecca, for joining us. You are a woman who's done a lot for women, for many different groups. I've seen your devotion, and I've seen your devotion to philanthropy, and you are a leader, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for coming on the show today. And if there's anything else you want to add, you have about 20 seconds.
Well,
Say
thank
it.
you. Thank you, Jean. You are such a role model for women around the country and around the nation. And
very kind.
Thank you so much for having me today on your show.
Okay, and thank you. And this concludes Successful Philanthropy. And for all of our viewers, I wish you a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.